Hi. So here we are going into the last week of the course, and I'm delighted by the progress that you've been making in the course. Particularly have enjoyed the discussion posts and some of the answers that I've been receiving from this section. You've been a big group, but a very active group, and I've learned a lot myself. I hope that you have too. I have really appreciated your ability to bring your own real life work experiences. Many of you have good experience at high levels in your organization, good experience with leadership that you've been very generously sharing with others as well. So whether you're new to the study of leadership or this is well to this course, I hope this has been helpful for you. I'm glad to see that a couple of teams are already making headway on their final presentation, which is due next Monday night, the 31st of August, if I've got that number right in my head. And I just wanted today to post a little video to clear up if there's any questions left in your mind about the specifics of the assignment. Remember, the assignment is in two parts, and one part remains the same just as you see it posted in the syllabus and you see it posted in the course. And then the second part, the part about the merger, is the part that I have changed for this iteration of the course and hope to have it changed permanently. I just felt this was a better opportunity for us to this is a better case for us to look at than the old American Airlines case, which is now over and done with. You can research that if you like. This is one that's going on right now, and as I said early in the course, I have some experience. I have many years of experience as a manager for Staples, so I know something about one side of this merger, having been in a company that was first acquired by Staples and then becoming a manager in the Staples organization as that organization merged with other companies as well. And so I know something of the history from the inside of that and how that went, and hope to share that with you a little bit, just to give you some insight. You don't need anything that I am telling you now in order to finish your group presentation. One group submitted something earlier to me today for review, if you can believe that, a week early. Good job. Working ahead, I like to see that, but product very close to being completely acceptable with a few minor edits, even without seeing this video. But if you're stuck, if you find that your team is a little dry on ideas, this maybe will help you. Just a couple of slides here I want to share that might help you think of how you might make these contrasts. Before we go into that specifically, I just want to remind you about the first part of the assignment. It is that 7-page paper. It is a personal. This is a personal paper. Each student is expected to turn in this paper, and this has to do with analyzing those 8 steps that Kotter says that we should take in business in order to counteract those 8 types of failure that he sees commonly when businesses try to make changes. And for each of those, the assignment asks you simply to analyze, in light of what you learned this semester, in light of what you already know, to analyze each of those 8 steps and talk about the strengths and weaknesses of those solutions. And if you're dry on ideas for that, I suggest all you do is go back and read previous discussion questions. We have talked about strengths and weaknesses of these ideas all through the course, and I think that most of you probably have a really good idea by now about how to approach that. Let me reiterate, for this assignment, it is appropriate for you to include an abstract. I will not even say at this point that I require an abstract. Some of you have gotten from me a long explanation in writing because of your use of abstracts in the paper. That's something that I'd love to have a discussion. I may I may develop videos just to discuss these auxiliary topics. Abstracts is one of them. Abstracts are a research tool. Abstracts are there for researchers who are looking at many similar articles. I'm in a doctoral program right now and doing research, which means that if I want to research my particular topic, I may look at 100 different articles in the next 2 weeks, trying to identify articles that actually speak most directly to the topic I'm interested in. And remember, these journal articles are all, if you print these out, they would be 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 pages long. These are long things to read through to find out if you can really use that information. So in a paper like that, when you do a thesis, when you do a dissertation, an abstract becomes a really necessary and required part of the paper because it summarizes very quickly your whole paper. So it should conclude in summary a statement of the problem and your conclusions. Usually the last part of an abstract or an executive summary will say, you know, based on the evidence, the researchers concluded that whatever video games, violent video games do in fact cause children to behave more violently in certain social situations. The rest of your paper then is there to prove that in detail and to talk about the details. So you're not hiding the conclusion. You're going to be right up front with the conclusion and say, this is what I found, so that researchers who are addressing the same topic can easily look at that and say, oh, this is right up my alley. This is what I'm studying. And hopefully, regardless of your conclusion, it's a big mistake to only pick papers that support your conclusion. That's not entirely honest research. In the context of a short paper, the abstract is hardly necessary, right? We could read through the paper in about as much time as we can read through the abstract. So I know that if you've been in a class where you're strictly following form, you might have had somebody that said you have to use an abstract, and I won't say that that's unnecessary. I will just say that in the context of my course, that's not a required element of the APA format. And I think my reasons for not requiring that are very good. I said all that to say this: you can include an abstract if you want to on your final paper, which of course the reason students like to include those sometimes is that they summarize the paper and use up a whole page, because APA format requires you to go down to the next page. Well, I get it, and that's fine, but if you're going to give me an abstract, give me an abstract, which means it needs to be a summary of your whole paper. The problem statement, a brief description of your research, a brief summary of your conclusions, and then I'll read the details, such as it is, in the rest of your paper. So bear that in mind. If you're going to use an abstract, make it really an abstract. Don't make it an introduction. Don't, that's a different critter than an abstract. An abstract is a summary. All right. If you have any questions about that final paper, of course, feel free to lob them over to me, and I'll help as much as I can, but hopefully you're on a good start on that already. And if not, you probably need to get to writing your group project. Again, we're going to study the Staples Office Depot merger. And one of the frameworks that I find useful that was not really approached in the materials for this course, but that I think that you will find helpful going forward, and you may have already been exposed to this, is the concept of this culture matrix. Like all tools, this is a oversimplification of what happens in corporate culture. Corporate culture, just like the culture that it's embedded in, just like societal culture, changes all the time, and people, the same person experiences that culture differently depending on the context, and yet they do tend to to fall into certain areas. I just think this is a very useful way of looking at it. Let's move me out of the way here. Maybe I'll go down here this time. Because I constructed this myself, but you can find this model in many books. I took it from a business ethics class that I've taught before. I didn't even take this diagram, just made this diagram up, but these concepts you can find here or in a number of other places. This is a fairly common way to look at corporate cultures. This is constructing a matrix. It's saying, what are the two primary concerns that you can have in a company, in a culture? And one way to answer that is you could say you can care about people or you can care about results to a different extent. And one reason you might choose these as the two different axes of this graph, so to speak, is because sometimes these are, as we know, in business and in life, these are contradictory. If I'm going to define results as maximum profitability, for instance, then there are going to be many instances where individual people become, from their perspective, victimized by that, right? Maybe something as simple and essential as laying off workers because the company's not profitable. Most, even the workers who are being laid off, would probably accept, most of them, the necessity of doing that at some point, but very few of them probably agree that this is the point, right? There's probably more we can do, but without laying me off. So that, or may have objections about the way that profit is being generated by laying them off, instead of fixing fundamental problems that got them in this mess to start with. You have worked by now, many of you, many different places, just as I, or several different places like I have, and so you can see the differences from one place to another. If you can be a small family-owned business. I've been in small family-owned businesses before. That was the start of my career in office products. That business, that when we grew that into a much larger business, and we sold that to a company and continued to work for that company, and that company sold to Staples. And so that's how I spent a big part of my career in the same industry, working for different companies. Each of those companies had a slightly different culture. In a small family-owned business, I was about to say, often concerns about individuals, since the individuals are so few in number and they are so reliant on this business, and they're so important to your business because they're not interchangeable. They're not, you don't have extra people in a small business. When there's just 4 or 5 of you, everybody has to pitch in. You can't, and that means that everybody is critical to the mission. And so you often are willing to make sacrifices to results, whether that's more customers, better profitability, faster expansion, whatever those results that you're measuring are that would in some way describe the success of your business. You're often in a position where you have to sacrifice those in order to keep your workers intact, to make somebody whole. And you may have worked in situations like this before. If you look at the matrix here and you see, I'll use a pointer, when concern for employees is very high, and as a matter of fact so high that concern for results is actually secondary to that, then we call that a caring culture. That's a culture that really values its employees and often can be a very pleasant place to work. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that that can also be an aggravating place to work, right? Have you ever worked in a small family-owned business and maybe the caring you felt like was not equally distributed? Maybe often, maybe family members are getting a little bit more caring than everybody else. And so, there's no perfect solution here. I just want you to understand that there's a range of There's a range of sort of corporate cultures, and my experience is they do kind of fall into these areas for long periods of time. On the other end of that scale, what if you work for some place where concern for results was so high over here that people are essentially sacrificed to the mission? In other words, in the most negative kind of connotation, that say profitability or extra sales are so important that if you don't make your quotas, you're fired, right? No remediation, no training, no whatever. And there are business cultures like that. There are some very successful business cultures like that. I got to tell you, there's probably more successful cultures like that than there are successful caring cultures. We call this an exacting culture, by the way, a culture that is highly focused on results, not so much on individuals. Okay, I'm going to have to pause the recording here for just a moment, and I'll be right. Okay, so back again. Sorry for the interruption. Although I suppose it wasn't any interruption at all from your end, was it? In an exacting culture, I was about to say, people are second, and you can see how this can develop, especially in a very large organization. The two companies that we're looking at that are merging are both very large organizations with tens of thousands of workers, and so you may suspect that a caring culture that puts people first is not likely to be what you find there, simply because it's people assume less individual significance, right? It's a fact of life. They're more replaceable, if you want to think of it that way. Not to be demeaning toward people, but simply to say that if somebody is not performing at a certain standard, it's a lot easier when I'm a manager at Staples or Office Depot to say, I'm sorry, you're not performing at the level we talked about. I'm going to have to try somebody else. If our company has 4 people in it, that's a lot harder, right, to say. I have to find ways to make it work with you because you're a fourth of our company. And so size has a lot to do with how these things work, but also conscious decisions that companies make. Companies can be pretty large and still maintain a caring culture, but probably fair to say only in certain kinds of work. It has to be work that keeps you together as a group and establishes a strong group identity and a strong business identity based on that. You can see in the typical consolidation that's gone on throughout many industries, especially since the 80s, and office supplies is a prime example. Office supplies used to be lots of little companies all over. Every little town had their own office supply, and you paid a whole lot more for office supplies, I got to tell you. They were not efficient models. They were normally family owned. And then in the 80s, the big box stores, Office Depot was first, and Office Max and Staples, I believe, was last. And now here at Staples, that's really the king of the roost, and is bidding to become essentially your office products provider. If you read the company histories, you will have noted that you may know of other office products names like Office Max. Office Max was bought several years ago by Office Depot. Corporate Express, it was a big one. Corporate Express was purchased while I was a manager at Staples by Staples, and I was part of the team in Oklahoma City that integrated those two teams together. Corporate Express was a big company, over $1 billion company all by itself, and operating in several countries. I think they started actually in the Netherlands. So there was a culture clash there, and there's going to be one when Staples and Office Max / Office Depot merge here, if they do. You may be familiar with office products companies like Viking. That is owned by Office Depot. They run it as a separate company for mail order. But in case you want to take your business to Quill, Office Products is owned by Staples, and runs in Dallas. It runs out of a warehouse right across the street from the Staples warehouse. It's those brand names are often kept separate because they appeal to a different demographic, and so you need to know this is true about when you go into the grocery store and you buy things and you say, "Oh, I'm not going to buy that brand there. I don't like them." You may be buying from the same company. Often that's a way of establishing market dominance, in fact, while still appearing to have a wide range of competitors. The other two we haven't talked about. Then let's go to these are generally thought of as bad and good cultures. Apathetic cultures. You may have worked someplace before where there's a vacuum in leadership. Or think about Office Depot right now, on the verge of being assimilated, if you will. I'm sure they're not thinking of it in terms of a merger. No matter what face the company's put on it, employees usually think in terms of them and us. That's what you have to get over. That's essentially the whole process of leading through an integration like that, is when you finally hear people say us instead of them and us, right? This is the way we used to do it. When you finally get people who are just saying, our company instead of that company that's them and this group over here that's us, then you've made big progress. But it takes a lot of work to get there. You have to establish trust. Those people that are about to be acquired, that's a horrible way of putting it, we're going to acquire you, feel like they are at the mercy, and they have every reason to believe, most of them, that the company that's doing the acquiring will come in and put their people in those people can come in, they're going to sit in my chair, and why they need me. I do the same thing that person does. And there is this process where you have to be scrupulously fair about understanding how the jobs overlap and trying to keep as many people on board as you can. But you go into a big merger like this, understanding many people are not going to be necessary anymore. That's one of the whole purposes of continuing to consolidate. One of the whole purposes of continuing to pull companies together is it's supposed to create efficiencies. That's the line that you sell to Wall Street when you're proposing a merger, and what you hope will drive your share price up in Wall Street is the fact that this new combined company is going to be more efficient. It's going to realize ever greater economies of scale that allow it to operate more efficiently, more work with not as many more people. And so that can cause that feeling right now that people at Office Depot may be feeling, can cause apathetic culture. It doesn't matter what I'm going to do. I'm going to lose my job anyway. Companies that are in a decline are failing and don't have leadership that can step up and take control of that situation, often develop an apathetic culture. And apathetic culture is when there's not really concern for each other. There's not really concern for the employees, and not really concern for the work results either. This can happen. Of course, it's usually a sign that the company is absolutely failing. And then finally, what you might think of as the ideal, the integrative culture, where there's a high concern for employees and a high concern for results that go the same hand in hand. You've read enough now about leadership that you know these two things can be conflictual unless you think of results in terms of investing in employees. Investing in employees to achieve results. That's how you move toward an integrative culture. Not telling employees we have to improve profit by 2%. If you don't remember Carly Fiorina's words when she went to Lucent from HP and said, if you can't hit these numbers, I'll find somebody who can. She's not the first or last executive who's ever used that sort of language, but you can see that's not very integrative. The integrative approach would be to say, if you can't hit these numbers, we're going to train you or teach you how, and give you the resources to do it. And then if you still can't hit those numbers, then perhaps you're not the person who can do that. But you have to put the people first. So my whole point here, where is Staples and where is Office Depot on this matrix? And what implications does that have for the merger? This is one way that you can think of it, one factor that you could analyze in your group presentation. And so I can tell you from experience that Staples, I would put, if I had to pick one of these boxes, I'd put it in exacting culture. That is very oriented toward metrics, hitting certain numbers, and if you didn't hit those numbers, there were consequences. However, there was a stated concern, and we'll look at that in the second slide here. There was a stated concern for training employees and investing in employees, and there were some efforts to do that at Staples. I don't want to say that they were totally an exacting culture. If I had to pick a spot, I would probably say somewhere around here. High emphasis on results. That really drove everything. And then programs to invest in employees that would sometimes move this up into sort of an integrative culture. Far from being a nirvana up here, though, and you're hardly ever going to work places where you achieve this. That's the goal, and you can have a lot to do about achieving that locally in your area of management. That's why your skills are so important as a manager. You can achieve an integrated team where people feel supported on your team, even if you're working in exacting culture or even a apathetic culture. There's an old saying that people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. And if you think back on your work experiences, you might be able to validate the fact that it almost doesn't matter what that big corporate umbrella is. If you're in a situation where local management controls the culture, then you're constantly, your frame of reference is going to be the local manager. That's good news and bad news for you as managers, and all of you, some of you already are, and I know probably all of you aspire to be, or you wouldn't be taking these kind of courses. Leaders and managers, and that is that you can do things to create an integrative culture in your area. You don't have to be victimized. It's harder if you're in a exacting culture, an apathetic culture. It's even harder if you come from a caring culture, because sometimes an insistence on results can be completely undermined if you're in an organization where results are ignored or they're not recognized across the company as being important. Why would people work harder if they don't have to? So, all the things you've been learning in leadership are ways to try and move people toward higher performance and yet a sense of stronger support. Communication, right, that we've talked about, is flexibility, time, enough time to make changes, intelligent responses. Talk about caring. I'm not a person myself who needs somebody to come in and pat me on the back all the time, but for somebody to say, hey Scott, what do you think of this? A manager, when they don't have to, that is, they care about my opinion, right? That's a demonstration of caring that you can do. Okay, so there's one thing, is to think about these cultures. Number two, I need to finish this, wrap this up. It's already a long video. Number two, I want you to look at values as these two companies themselves portray them on their websites. So from Office Depot site and from Staples Advantage, this is the division I actually work for. Staples Advantage is the business-to-business part of Staples. So I didn't manage the retail stores. I managed business-to-business sales, which means I had an administrative staff and a staff of salespeople and a staff of course, product specialists, and that would go into large corporations. Our accounts averaged about $1.5 million worth of office products a year. So if you can imagine the size of a company it would have to be to buy $1 million worth of office products, that's who we were primarily concerned with servicing. There are companies that buy much larger amounts than that, but we had a different division that mainly supported companies that were a lot smaller than that. We had a few that were in that mid-market area that we were happy to serve as well. So that's what Staples Advantage is. Staples Advantage is actually the business-to-business division of Staples, and it's the biggest part of what they do. This merger, you understand, the proposed merger between Staples Advantage and Office Depot will not only purchase Office Depot's retail stores, but will purchase their commercial division as well, which I believe is the largest part of their business as well. I'm not really sure about that fact, though. It may still be smaller than their retail part. Let me move this out of the way because it's annoying. Look at what Office Depot says their values are. Look at what Staples Advantage says their values are. Here's just an interesting contrast. Depot has the typical verbiage. It looks like they've taken every positive adjective in the dictionary and stuffed it in here, right? And it reads like a pledge to the customer. Look at Staples Advantage, which has pared it down into simple. I actually think this is pretty brilliant. And they did this while I was there. This was something that I'm familiar with already. They pared down values into these simple quotable statements like own it, say it like it is, and made those statements part of the culture. You heard managers all the time saying, say it like it is, right? I think that was actually a smart thing to do. I think that is a real move toward integrating cultural statements, at least, into what you can use every day. Let's face it, this on the left over here for Office Depot, that's nice, but it's hardly something you can actually use day to day to direct your activities, right? We will fuel our customers' dreams by anticipating and listening to their needs and passionately delivering on our promises. Not just delivering, but passionately, for Pete's sakes. Failure is not an option as we promise to wow on recovery. Wow. Yeah, I'm saying wow because I'm thinking there's not a single actionable statement in there, right? It sounds nice, but I don't know how to fuel my customers' dreams. Their dreams are their own business. I can certainly listen to their needs, but it doesn't say what specifically I should do in order to enhance my listening or anticipating their needs. So I think you got to be careful sometimes. These sort of values can be actually worked into the culture, and I think give credit where credit's due. I think Staples has done good work with this that a lot of companies don't do well. They took those values and they turned them into short little bits that then could be actually repeated. And these they integrated this, by the way, with the performance review. Part of your performance review when I was a manager at Staples was that we took these part of the performance review, about 25% of the weight of the performance review was actually not on measurements of performance, but on the employee had to demonstrate that they had done something that basically give a narrative some instance with a customer or with another employee where they had demonstrated these values, and then I had to validate that and rate them that way. Now, here's an interesting thing about an exacting culture, though. Even though as well deployed as that was, you'll notice that that had a weighted, and it had a weighted measurement in your performance evaluation. But when it came right down to it, like so many other arenas that you'll see, I mean, I've heard this from many other people in other companies. The performance reviews themselves were basically graded on a curve, if you will. That is, as a manager in a district, I didn't really have the option at Staples to say all of my employees I think we had a 5-point scale, made a 5.0 on these, whether they did or not. In this class, if everyone makes 100, you all make an A. Even if everyone makes a 90%, you all make an A. It's up to you. And I hope you do. I hope everyone performs at that level. And so that's one of the things nice about education is my support is unalloyed in, I have the same objective for everybody in this class, is that everybody makes an A. That's a pretty easy mark of success. But since there were different levels of increment of raises tied to this, you were basically instructed that you can have, if I had a staff of 15, you can have 2 people that get a 5.0. You can have 3 people that fall into a 4.5 to 4.9 range, literally, to say, and their only justification for this, of course, was, well, everybody can't be perfect. Well, even if that's true, in other words, you can't possibly have 15 people that all actually embrace these values. Makes you question what the values are for, doesn't it? But it was really driven by the fact that we can't give everybody the maximum raise, and we're not going to do that. So make sure that these things are doctored is a strong word, graded on the curve. It was many of you may have found the very same thing where you work. I'd be interested to kind of hear if anybody comments on this in the forum or whatever that we've got left about how employee evaluations are done. And employee evaluations say a lot about your real values as well. So you can see there might be actually a stronger set of values, at least in terms of ability to execute, that Staples has to offer. I wanted you to notice as well that these value statements at Staples are directed at the employee. Notice this is not really directed to the customer at all. The Office Depot statement is really directed toward the customer. This is what we will all do for you. And Staples is directed toward the employee and saying, this is how we want you to execute the values. These are the values that we have internally. And this is what we would show to a customer when they said, if it was a major presentation where you include this kind of thing, your mission and your values, we would do this as well. And it worked pretty well. This is something that I think they did pretty well. But you can see again a potential here for these values to clash. The Staples values are a lot more about personal performance. Even the own it, say it like it is, right? Directed to you, and they're pretty directive. So take personal responsibility, act with urgency, be accountable. Those are all sayings that basically say your success or failure is up to you. That's starting to sound a little bit like an exacting culture, isn't it? Now, people thrive. There's some people that thrive in an exacting culture because they're competitive. They want to perform and they want to be measured that way, and they want to be measured on something meaningful. If your Office Depot employee is used to being measured by very non-metrical things like this, then how are they going to adapt to an environment where they have to demonstrate their worth by being able to perform at certain levels, certain measurements. What if those measurements are different? What if the way you measure success or performance at Staples is a lot different from the way that they're measuring performance and success at Office Depot? This can cause problems. I don't really have time. This is already too long. It's a 40-minute video, and you probably have all fallen asleep and quit watching by now. But if you're having trouble with a group project and wanted some things to think about in terms of what you could compare when you're comparing these two organizations, then one thing that you could talk about is either the values that might be different and how specifically that might lead to one of Kotter's errors, or the culture itself, whether these are integrative or exacting or apathetic or caring cultures, and how they might how those culture conflicts might again make this merger especially vulnerable to one of Kotter's reasons that companies can't change. A merger is one of the biggest kind of changes you have in the life of your company. Okay, I hope this was a little bit helpful, or at least a little bit informative about what's in my head. Be in touch this last week as we go through these discussion questions, and I will too. We have not gone at the same place, but I think pace, that is, my grading is not as, my turnaround has not been like I'd want it to in this course, but I'm sure we will all finish at the same time. That is, by next Monday, when you submit your final project, I'm sure that you'll know exactly where you stand on your grade, except for the work you just turned in. And I will do everything I can to make sure that happens. Please keep up the good work. Call me if you need me, and let's finish this course out. Okay, I will be talking to you later. Thanks.